There was nothing else at all in the whole world but football.
Hello and welcome to the Triple F for another episode of the Magic of, where we provide in-depth profiles on clubs from all over the world. We like to cover a whole range of clubs, from those with a rich history to those with new beginnings. Massive clubs with international support to smaller clubs with a modest yet equally passionate fan base. And clubs you've most likely heard of to the ones that you probably haven't. This episode is all about a club most fans of Premier League and English football should be quite familiar with. Ipswich Town are the most prominent professional football club in the county of Suffolk, which is within the East Anglian region of England. Join me now for my chat with longtime friend Luke, of whom I've known since the age of 5, to go back down memory lane to find out why he has such a deep affection for the Tractor Boys. I sincerely hope you all enjoy the magic of Ipswich Town. Ipswich AFC were formed in 1878. They merged with Ipswich Rugby Club to form Ipswich Town FC in 1888, turned professional in 1936, and began playing in Division 3 of the English Football League 2 years later. For their first 15 years of professional football, they experienced the Second World War, several mid-table finishes, promotion to the second division, relegation back to the Division 3 South, and then capped it off with the hiring of a future World Cup winning manager. On the 9th of August 1955, Alf Ramsey was appointed manager of Ipswich Town. In Ramsey's first season at the club, Ipswich scored 106 goals in 46 games, and they finished third in the Division 3 South. The following season of 1956-57, the club won the Division 3 South title for the second time and saw the emergence of local striker Ted Phillips, scoring 46 times during the season, which remains the highest number of goals scored by an Ipswich player during one season. Ipswich had their most successful season to that point in 1960-61, winning the second division and promotion to the top level of English football, ahead of Sheffield United and Liverpool. In the top flight, Ipswich became champions of the Football League at their first attempt in 1961-62, with Ray Crawford joint English and European top scorer. After Ramsey left to manage the England national team in 1963, Ipswich dropped down into the second division in 1964. They eventually clawed their way back to the top division in 1969, and they drafted in young, upcoming manager Bobby Robson for their second spell in Division 1. Robson led Ipswich to 2 major trophies and several seasons in top-flight European football. The successful period began in 1973 when the club won the Texaco Cup and finished 4th in the league, qualifying for the UEFA Cup for the first time. In the 1974-75 season, they reached the semi-finals of the FA Cup for the first time, losing to West Ham United after a replay, and finished 3rd in the league. By the late 1970s, Robson had built a strong side with talent in every department, introducing the Dutch pair Arnold Muren and Frans Thijssen to add flair to a team that featured British internationals including John Walk, Terry Butcher and Paul Mariner. Ipswich regularly featured in the top 5 of the league and in the UEFA Cup. Major success came in 1978 when Ipswich beat Arsenal at Wembley Stadium to win their only FA Cup trophy. The triumph was followed by a UEFA Cup victory in 1981 with a 5-4 victory over AZ Alkmaar in the 2-legged final. The run to the final included a 4-1 win at St Etienne, captained by Michel Platini. The club also finished as league runners-up in 1981 and 82. Robson's success with Ipswich inevitably attracted the attention of many, and a year later, the Football Association lured Robson away from Portman Road when he accepted their offer to manage the England national team in July 1982. Robson's successor at Ipswich was his assistant manager Bobby Ferguson. Ipswich were finally relegated to the second division at the end of the 1985-86 season. Butcher, the last remaining key player from that successful 81 team, was sold to Rangers that summer. Ferguson, who had remained in charge despite the relegation, resigned in May 1987 after reaching the promotion playoffs but failing to return the club to the first division. Appointed in 1994, George Burley was unable to turn performances around, and Ipswich suffered a Premiership record defeat 9-0 at the hands of Manchester United on their way to relegation. Back in the second tier of English football, Burley led the club to 3 consecutive promotion playoffs, but they were to endure defeat in all 3 semi-finals. Ipswich Town finally returned to the Premier League in 2000 after coming from behind to beat Barnsley 4-2 in the last Division 1 playoff final at Wembley Stadium. Ipswich performed well in the top flight in their first season, with Burley's side finishing in an impressive 5th place, being pipped by Liverpool on the last day of the season for a place in the Champions League. Consolation was a UEFA Cup place and FA Premier League Manager of the Year award for George Burley. However, the team took only 1 win in their opening 17 league games the following season, leaving them bottom in December. Despite a good run of form in January and February, Burley could not save the club from relegation back to the Championship at the end of the season. The loss of income due to relegation also led to the club going into financial administration. There was the minor consolation of again qualifying for the UEFA Cup, this time via the UEFA Fair Play ranking, and Ipswich survived 2 ties before losing in the second round proper to Czech side Slovan Liberec. A slow start to the season, culminating in a 3-0 defeat to struggling Grimsby Town, meant that Burley was sacked in October 2002 after nearly 8 years as their manager. Since then, the club has endured a gradual slide down into League One, a mixture of valiant, mediocre and downright unsuccessful managerial tenures were had from the likes of Tony Mowbray, Joe Royle, Jim Magilton, Roy Keane, Paul Jewell, Mick McCarthy and Paul Lambert. Former Wigan boss Paul Cook is currently in charge of Ipswich Town. With a 4-1 win over 4th place Wycombe Wanderers this Tuesday, hopes of promotion, at least via the playoffs, remain alive. And now for the chat with lifelong friend and lifelong Town fan Luke Tibble to find out why he loves Ipswich Town so much. So mate, I'm pretty sure you've told me the answer to this at some point, and I think I kind of know, but I just want you to tell me in a bit more detail, really, and why do you support Ipswich Town?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, though, because obviously we grew up in the same area, East Northants. No one knows where that is on a map, really, unless you're from there. And growing up, there was no real clubs around us. You've got Peterborough, and I'm sure there'll be Peterborough fans that would say they're a club, but when you're, 7, 8, 9, you don't want to support a club that no one knows about, do you? So I think I was at a point where I remember asking my mum who to support, and she talked about Wellingborough, which is a small town. And you think, there's no club at Wellingborough. And then you got Northampton, the Cobblers on the doorstep, and this was pre Rushden Diamonds time, so there was nothing local. And we had some friends that lived fairly close to us, and they were good friends of ours. They've got kids same age as we have, so I guess parents stayed fairly friendly, and they moved over to Ipswich, and we'd go visit them. Something to do for the weekend, and we'd go out that way, and it was I vividly remember like talking to Pete, who's the boy Pete Crawley, who's the boy of the family, who was my age, talking to him about what going to a football match was like, what songs are there, like what is it. And him, I don't think he'd been that many times, but he put me right and showed me what I should and shouldn't be doing. And it was just something for us to do when we went and visited our friends over in Ipswich. It's a funny one because in my mind, that whole family would have been Ipswich supporters. Now knowing them as adults, the dad was a Man United fan, which I never found out and broke my heart. Pete's an Arsenal fan. and kind of it wasn't the thing you think it was necessarily. And I'm kind of sat there going, well, I'm the Ipswich fan. Like I haven't had all these years of trophies and fun, but it was that. Yeah, family friends moved out that way. It was something we did. First game was Wimbledon in I think it was a League Cup match or something, and we won. And I'd never seen or been to anything like it. It was just unreal. And I just loved football at that time, and you'll remember all we did was football, and like I remember Christmas you'd get football for like that was it. Like all I wanted was a football. So you've got this kind of innate like drive to play this game, but I had a big void where I didn't know who I should be supporting. I didn't want to just support anyone for the sake of it. I wanted to support someone for real and someone that I would hopefully see, and Ipswich kind of fell in the plate.
Brilliant answer there. I mean, that was more or less what I thought it was. But what I didn't know was that Mark or Pete didn't actually turn out to be massive Ipswich fans, because I just assumed the same as you, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were kind of left with a short straw there, really. So that's
well, yeah. Absolutely. And it's funny. It's whenever we do, very rarely meet up with them now because we're all grown up with kids and families and whatever else. But when we do meet up, it's the first thing they ask me about. And it's kind of it's like, you live in the town, like you'll know more than I do. Like I live an hour and a bit away, like you are literally within walking distance of Portman Road. But yeah, it was a funny thing to come to terms with in your mid to late 20s. Like it only then comes back up. You think, I didn't know you. And to be a Man United fan as well, like Mark really let us down there.
Yeah, but I can relate to you there. It's funny when you mentioned Man United, because I pretty much had the same as you, and I guess it just took me a lot longer to actually settle on a team. But I just didn't want to support Man United. I didn't want to support a massive team. I know it kind of sounds ironic when I support Arsenal, but well, they're not necessarily massive these days. But yeah, I just couldn't bring myself to supporting a big empire type team. And I suppose had I found a team like Ipswich or something like that, then yeah, it would have been definitely understandable. But yeah, I can definitely get my head round why you chose a team like Ipswich. The next question, really, in your opinion, what do you think is the greatest achievement in the club's history? Because I've been doing a little bit of research, and it's a difficult one, because it's really a toss-up between sort of winning the league in 61, 62 and the UEFA Cup in 81, unless there's something else you think there is as well.
I think it's a weird one for me, because obviously these are all things that happened way before I'm born. Even like the UEFA Cup win is a few years before us being born. So in my mind, Ipswich were a team that were, when I first, that season I saw them, it was a year before. I think it was the first year of the Premiership. It must have been.
Yeah.
And it was the year Man United first won the league, and then the year after we went to a few other games, and that was the season that we lost 9-0 to Man United. So obviously that's the opposite of the biggest achievement. But that's the club I know, if that makes sense. So I don't know us as a European powerhouse or a league title winning team. If you look at it on paper, I think probably the biggest achievement is the size of the club and the fact that it's overachieved. And I say that because if you look at the teams that have actually won a European Cup in the UK, there's not that many, or less than 15. And most of them you'll be able to reel off without even thinking about. And then the teams that have won the league, there's probably a few more, but ultimately, the teams that have won the league and won a European Cup and won the FA Cup, there's not that many of them. And it's one of those quiz questions, one of those pub quiz questions, isn't it? Some of our generation would be hard graft to think of Ipswich having won all three of those things. But the fact that they've kind of got those trophies in the cabinet is pretty brilliant. But I think the biggest achievement, or the achievement that I think is probably not known about, so I'll share it as kind of an Ipswich fan who's got that insight, is Ipswich have played 60 odd games in European football, which is probably way more than anyone thought they would play. Of them, obviously, most of them are home and away legs. And we've played 31 times at Portman Road, and have never lost a game in European football.
Gee,
and that's stretching back from the 60s when we won the league. We've had the Milans there, we've had Madrid there, we've had the biggest clubs in Europe play there. We were in the UEFA Cup a fair bit in the 70s and the 80s. Like Ipswich were, if you don't know, and then you probably wouldn't have looked through Ipswich's history apart from for this. Ipswich were there or thereabouts through a lot of the 70s and the early 80s. Bobby Robson was gutted he didn't win a title, and we finished second quite a few times. We were one of those kind of clubs that I guess you'd look at probably a bit more. I guess it's like Leicester over the last few years, more so than I was going to say Spurs, but Spurs never win anything. So it's kind of that Leicester kind of mentality back then, and we spent a lot of the time overachieving with what was a small club with just decent players. And it's funny when you talk to someone of a different generation and you tell them you're an Ipswich fan, and they'll go back to the 80s or the late 70s. And in fact, I was listening to your podcast you did with the book parodies where you had to try and pick the books.
Yes.
And your colleague there, he was quite. You could see and hear it when he was talking about Ipswich. He knows a different Ipswich to the one that you and I know, because he was talking about that team in the 70s and the 80s that we had a bit of a Dutch influence, and we brought a few Dutch players over, but we had some just solid players back then that created a decent team, a decent ethos. That they weren't the world-beating players, and they didn't necessarily go on to enormous things, but they were a team and they really achieved. So I think to answer the question, I think the biggest achievement is remaining unbeaten in 30-odd games. But I think the reality is having 30 games in Europe means you've been doing something well. And I know this is going back to kind of, if we ignore the Champions League, whenever it opened up to have 3 or 4 British clubs in it, when it's kind of only 1 or 2, that's the kind of level that Ipswich were at to be able to get into Europe. And to have never lost at home is a pretty decent record.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You kind of don't want Ipswich to go back into Europe almost in a way to just sort of keep that and preserve it almost.
No chance of that any time very soon. Yeah. But I think, it is a weird one, because I learned about the record that season. We got in. We ended up with 2 seasons in Europe in the early 2000s, as you probably remember, like going up in what was 99-2000 to then finish 5th. And you'll remember, I think you were following Leeds a bit closer at that point, but between, and ironically Arsenal as well, if you look at that league, we were only about 3 points off Arsenal, Liverpool, Leeds for the Champions League point at that point. And we spent a lot of that season in 3rd or 4th, flirting with the Champions League, which would have been insane. But we also snuck into the UEFA Cup the year after, which we did get relegated with our second season syndrome. But we got in through the FIFA Fair Play League, and again, didn't lose at home, which is just, it helps if you're out in the first round, don't get me wrong, but to still not lose at home is a big kind of achievement there.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, when you put it like that, you can't really argue with that, to be honest. But if I had to sort of push you, and I'm going to because I'm like that,
go on.
But if you had to sort of choose between those two, either winning the league in 61-62 with Alf Ramsey and the UEFA Cup in 1981, which one would you say was?
I'd always pick a league. I always think winning the league's different gravy to winning a cup competition. I think, all due respect to teams that have performed really well in the cups, any team can win a cup. And that's been proven, and you only have to look at the likes of, I don't know, Greece winning the Euros not that long ago. The look at Pompey winning the FA Cup more than a few years back now. But there's teams that win cups, and you don't have to be on the ball that much to get to a final. Sometimes luck just runs you away, and sometimes bad luck runs the other way. For a league, day in, day out, grafting against all other teams, home and away, I don't think there's anything quite like that. And that's what Leicester is, what shows the true quality of what they did when they won the league. And the fact that there was other teams that bottled it, you don't necessarily get that in the cup, because it is cup finals the whole way through if you see it that way. It's just one-off games. In the league, you don't have a one-off game. You have game after game after game, and it's tougher. I'd have loved to have seen it. I'd have loved to have been a part of anything like that. The closest I've got is the playoff final, but it's that ability and that kind of graft to last a whole season. I think that has to be. If you win the league, I think that always comes first, ahead of Champions. If you start winning the league consistently, the cream, the kind of cherry on top is a Champions League, is a European Cup. We were lucky to win a European Cup, but we hadn't won the league before.
Yeah.
And I think if you asked Bobby Robson if he'd have swapped the league for the cup, 100% he would.
Yeah, it's almost a shame, like you say, the fact that they finished second was on a couple of occasions.
Yeah, 2 times.
Yeah, that's annoying. That must be irritating. Like, especially,
and there were strong teams we finished second too, but it would have gone really nicely with the UEFA Cup. It would have gone nicely with winning the FA Cup a few years before. But actually, like I say, it is just that we won 2 cups, which is amazing. Like, it's brilliant to have won 2 cups, but we didn't win the league. So therefore, you always feel like you've missed out. Whereas if you don't win the cup, but you do win the league, I feel like you can be pleased with that.
If you're interested in coming on the show for an Under the Floodlights special to talk about your favourite player or manager, please email the triplef2021@gmail.com or DM the triplef84 on Twitter. All contact details will be in the episode description. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F. We've kind of hinted at them, but we'll just get into a bit more detail with them. But the sort of wonderful managers that you've had throughout your history, who would you say is your favourite ever manager? Again,
this is one of those questions. My favourite is George Burley, because he's the guy that took me to see in Ipswich do the things that I got to see.
That's the manager that sort of sticks in my sort of childhood memories of knowing you and growing up with you. And then, just George Burley is the manager I associate as the Ipswich Town manager. But yeah. Exactly.
And Ipswich had a lovely tradition of sticking with managers. So actually at the point, I remember a stat when, I think it was, it might have been when we had Joe Royal in charge. So this was after George Burley had left. And he'd been at Ipswich a long time. And Joe Royal at that point, Ipswich had less managers in their history than, pretty sure it was Leeds, than Leeds had in the last kind of 8 years or something ridiculous like that. I know Leeds went on that horrific journey to kind of through the leagues and back and forth, but it just kind of said something about the club. Alf Ramsey was in the club for a long time. Bobby Robson was in the club 15 odd years, and like this, these are long-standing managers. They both went on to the England job as well. It's not like they just left to find money somewhere. The national team called them, and up until recently, with Gareth Southgate and his heroics, these were the 2 best England managers we've had of all time as well. Yeah. So if you did this podcast with someone who's talking about their England managers, those 2 are going to pop up. They both cut the crap at Ipswich. Bobby Robson was unbelievable what he did with it. Like I say, he joined in the late 60s, and took all the way through the 70s, brought them up to that level of UEFA Cup competition, FA Cup, second in the league. Amazing. And for Alf Ramsey, to win the league itself, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But yeah, my choice is George Burley.
Yeah.
George Burley. Definitely not Roy Keane. Absolute nonsense he was, but George Burley.
Best season for George Burley? Obviously, it must be that season where they qualified for Europe, right, in the Premier League.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he won all the kind of managerial awards at that point. I don't think anyone had really done that, had come up. Like it's happened a little bit since, and arguably the season after kind of put it into kind of some kind of perspective. But that season came up. I think people forget people don't forget. Ipswich Town fans won't forget, but most others will. Got to the semi-final of the League Cup there as well. We did get hammered by Birmingham, I believe, but we got to the semi-final of the League Cup. We didn't have. It wasn't that much of a different team that got us promoted, and we only got promoted through the playoffs. It wasn't. Admittedly, we were third, but in the league, but we got promoted through the playoffs. But it was just a it was the classic Ipswich style of football, which Bobby Robson had employed, and was the only Ipswich I knew, which was put the ball on the ground and pass it around. It's kind of that Liverpool pass and move mentality is what we were all about. I think that's what's been interesting in the recent history with Ipswich, is that kind of disappeared, and a manager like Mick McCarthy did not get on with the Ipswich fans, obviously, as he left, and it was quite entertaining more than anything in terms of the fallout, but that's not his brand of football.
No.
But it is Ipswich. It's ingrained in who Ipswich is. They promote their youth, they bring them through, and they also play good football. But that has to be the best season. I think, in a weird way, the season before has that massive feeling at the end of winning the playoffs, and it was absolutely having lost so many playoff semi-finals. I still think Ipswich hold the record for having lost the most in the semi-finals. We've only ever got to one final, which we fortunately won, and beating Barnsley. And I don't know if you remember the Jason that used to live around the corner was a Barnsley fan, and they fell through the floor, poor Barnsley, off the back of that. But we had so many. I think Charlton knocked us 3 years in a row out of the playoff semi-finals. If from memory, it's a bit blurry, but. And we've lost since then. We've lost to Norwich. We've lost to West Ham a whole bunch of times. We are not good in the playoffs.
No.
So to have already lived through that, like having a whole season come down to basically 2 matches and then this final, we were awful. And what was quite ironic was we lost 3 times in the playoff semis. And at the time, David Sheepshanks was our chairman. Very well respected kind of chairman in football. And he was head of the league at that point, so kind of the championship level and whatever else. He had, because Ipswich had gone out twice on away goals. He changed that part of the playoffs to ensure that your whole season can't come down to away goals. And ironically, there was a point where we would have normally have gone through on away goals, but we ended up having to play extra time or having to do something special in that match against Bolton because we were away goals didn't count anymore. And I can't remember if we scored I'm pretty sure one of the games was 5-3 at Bolton. And I'm sure Jim McGill got a hat trick at one point as well. It was a mad playoff, and then the final itself was just unreal as well. And yeah, it was. I can't pick between those two, honest, because to have that, like, you're building up to this pinnacle, and it's like the fairy tale come true because you've spent this whole time, and I was really, really, really into my football at that point, really into it, and then you spend that whole time building up to this crescendo, and then you actually win, and you're like, what? But then it just stayed. The next season, you stayed at that level, and then, yeah. It was good. It was a good couple of years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what's good as well is that there's almost 2 things to it. It's almost where Ipswich Town showed a lot of patience in George Belly, because I was reading up. Yeah. Was he there about 4 seasons or so before he got them into the Premier League or back into the Premier League?
I think it was about 96. I think he might have taken over, 95, 96. So yeah, that would have made sense.
Yeah, because he took over when they got relegated, right?
Yeah, and that's right. We got relegated,
and then brought them back.
I think out of those seasons, the first season we didn't quite make the playoffs, and then we just kept making the playoffs and falling out of them through various reasons. But yeah, I think they stuck with him, and they stuck with him afterwards as well. I think we didn't just after that poor season. It'd have been easy to get rid of him, but the other side of it is, and the thing probably. The elephant in the room is he was also a legend of a player at Ipswich as well, so that carries a lot of weight. He was part of Bobby Robson's era. He was a solid player. So he had history, and he knew what Ipswich was about. It was kind of even his interviews were Ipswich, if that makes sense. It just felt like he belonged. So it was. I think it was just it got to the point where we were flirting with the playoffs again. And he didn't have it anymore, and we needed something else because it was that weird time in football that cursed a lot of other clubs with the money like being really out of sync. It's not brilliant now, but back then it was even more out of sync. And Ipswich went into administration one of the first football clubs to do so, and it was because of the fact that you're in the Premiership, you got all this money, and then it disappears, and they didn't have the parachute payments back then. They didn't have those safeguards, and that really kicked our ass. And who knows what would happen if they were there? But equally, like, we got away quite lightly in the administration, because kind of now you lose all those points. I don't think Ipswich lost any, if many, back then. I can't remember us losing many points because of it.
Yeah. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, because obviously you look at that decision, you think, should we have got rid of George Burley? But you have to move on at some point. And obviously with those sort of financial things coming into play as well, it doesn't help. But yeah.
No. And Joe Royal had a decent track record then, and he wasn't a bad. He got us into the playoffs a few times as well. He wasn't a bad manager. But I think we just ended up in that. After George Burley left, it felt like the wheels kind of came. Jim Magilton had a bit of a spell as well, and we had a few interesting kind of moves, and we just became a mid-table Championship side, and we weren't ever really threatening relegation nor the playoffs, and it was just disappointing more than anything. And we held that record until we got relegated of being we were the longest serving Championship team. And you think that's not a record you should be proud of. No. But it was where we were at that point.
I suppose this question was meant to be a little bit lower on the agenda, but might as well. We've pretty much tucked into it a little bit already. But I mean, do you think it is, as you said before, just those sort of poor managerial appointments as to why you've slipped so far down the EFL ladder?
I think. Going into administration can't be underplayed. I think that had an impact, because you just lose all your money, and you don't have any. You literally don't have any money. Like I said, we weren't in administration that long, and I really didn't understand what was going on at the time, and I just knew we were in a lot of financial problems. And then the whole Marcus Evans era kind of kicked in not long after that. So we got bought out by this mystery benefactor who kind of runs like a ticketing type website and a few kind of casino website type stuff. And he's pumped a lot of money into the club, but it was at a time where kind of everyone was doing it and he wasn't pumping enough money in. But we lost that soul, we lost that culture of the club. I think Roy Keane appointment. I mean, I remember just watching Roy Keane interview. He seemed to be on Sky Sports every week, and he'd spend 3/4 of the interview talking about Man United or something else going on. He wasn't really talking about Ipswich. And I guess the fact that he's not in management, being a pundit again now, shows it's not him. He hasn't got that about him. Not every player can go on to be a manager. No. And I think some players that just won't be able to do it. He could be a coach of some sort, I'm sure, but you look at some of the best coaches that used to be players, they're normally average or failed players, because the difference is, for Roy Keane, he gave Roy Keane level of intensity to everything, and that's not every player's ability. They haven't got that ability to do that, and if you can't see that or compute that or understand it, you can't get that out of your players, I don't think. But yeah, I think that all went wrong, and then I think there's just a bit of an impatience thing, because a lot of other people would make money. We've got an owner that keeps putting money in and nothing's coming out. The thing that I saw, I remember through the 90s and the early 2000s, we used to have a decent conveyor belt of young players. So the likes of Kieran Dyer, who seems to be quite ill at the minute. I think he's gone in for some kind of liver transplant. He was a really good player. I don't think he was underestimated how good he was. Titus Bramble was 75% of the time. He was a solid, brilliant centre back. Richard Wright was a really, really good keeper, and we had a lot of youngsters coming through. Darren Bent, Connor Wickham, all these players. Dean Bowditch. They were solid youth players that were coming through. They won the Youth FA Cup during that period, and they should have gone on to do bigger and better things. We've still got a bit of that now, like the likes of Tyrone Mings, who came to us. We kind of took him from obscurity, I think, and gave him games, and Aaron Creswell as well. I think these were solid players that we had again, and we pushed them through. But I just you don't see that same youth coming through as well, and I think that's a big thing that's missing. because we earned money from these players to start with. Darren Bent went off for a lot of money, and then when he moved from Charlton to Spurs, I think we got another payout off the back of that. Titus Bramble gave us money, Richard Wright did, and so did Kieran Dyer. But ultimately, they also keep that Ipswich spirit and keep the fans on board. When you start losing that and you end up getting other players from elsewhere, you don't necessarily have that same spirit that you see. And if the manager's not your type of manager, and if you've been going to Ipswich 20, 30 years, I think of the Scholes dad. If Alan sat there looking, just thinking, who are all these? Like, where's the Ipswich that I was supporting through the 70s and 80s? Like, where are those solid kind of technical players that can pass the ball, can put a boot in, but like just play football? They're not here. So I think really it came down to money, and it came down to Marcus Evans, and I can't fault him because he put money. The club didn't go under, and he kind of kept them where they were. But there was just that next level missing. But not every club can have that. But what you do see now is a worrying trend that the clubs that are doing well have that bit more money.
Yeah.
Which ironically we've now got this new this new consortium coming from the States. Lots of money involved. They're doing fair bits around the club and kind of getting themselves involved, which is great.
Quite promising, do you think?
I think so, but with the exception of like the huge money spenders, like the likes of City and Chelsea,
Newcastle, you
kind of don't. yeah, exactly. Yeah, Newcastle now. There's always that sense of, hang on a minute, is something going to fall off the back of this? And I don't know if that's just the British way, and I don't know if that's just British football, and that's the culture we all buy into, because we don't tend to do that well. But I don't know. I've got as much hope as I ever have, and I think the thing that's changed, obviously, life moves on. Football becomes less of a part in some instances and more of a part in others. And I think right now it's coincided with other things in life, meaning I don't follow the football in the same way I did back in 2000 when honestly, like I couldn't get enough of it. And you've gone from those times where you're listening on the radio just to hear the score, or covering teletext like the whole time, going on 304 just to check the scores coming in, to now that I can trip over Ipswich content everywhere, and I don't have that same desire to do it, because you kind of the score's more important and the direction of travel is more important. And I think that's the difference when I've got older, at least, it's not so much about that one game anymore. It's about the bigger picture. So I hope this consortium are doing the right things. It sounds like they are. They're putting the money in the right places. They're not just throwing money at it either, which I think is a big problem of has happened with some clubs. The ground is great. The training facilities are good. There's no need to do anything there. Just make sure we've got the right coach and players, and I think that moves in the right direction. And then get the fans back on board.
Yeah, exactly. It's more or less just sort of cultivating and bringing back that culture and that identity that you know as Ipswich fans, really, as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
With Paul Cook, are you happy with him as a manager?
I think so. I think he's got a decent record. He seems to be doing okay. This season started badly, and I know we lost. Well, we're playing tonight, but I know we lost at the weekend at Plymouth, and they're top of the league. And you kind of think, well, we gave them a good game, 2-1 away, all the way down to Plymouth. It's a long old way to go. Not a bad result in the great pitch thing, and obviously we want to take something from it. But it shows that we're not a million miles away from the team leading that. But we've been. This is the second season in that league. You can't stay there much longer than that.
No.
I think it really becomes. You soon find yourself in the quicksand of sticking in that league then, and then all the kind of the pitfalls of losing the money and the crowd and all those kind of things. I think he seems like the right guy for the job. I think he had wholesale changes of the squad, absolutely like gutted it out and started again, which seems to be the right thing to do. And I commend that. And I think even if I didn't agree with the playing style and the types, at least he's doing it his way. And I think that's fair enough. You can't ask much more than that. It's those that try and bend their style to accommodate something else. You only have to look at Mourinho at Man United. I know it's different things, but he can't be a different manager for that club. He still has to be his manager. So I think we're okay. I'm not going to say we're in the safest of all hands, but it feels okay at the minute.
Yeah, no, that's cool. who's your favourite Ipswich Town player of all time?
For me, this is quite an easy one.
Can I guess who it is just before?
Yeah, please.
Is it John Walk?
Of course, it's John Walk. Yeah, of course, it's John Walk. It's a weird one because there's lots of players I've enjoyed, like, and some like real like niche players which have had some kind of. Mauricio Taricco was one of the players I used to absolutely love. So he went on to play for Spurs, I think.
Yeah,
from what I remember. And he was just this Argentinian kind of wing back that was nails and quick and solid. Pablo Cunyago, like a forward that we bought that season we went down, actually, turns on a sixpence. Like, honestly, I've never seen a man turn so quickly and so elegantly. But like, it has to be John Walk. And I think it's a weird one. If you look at the stats of Ipswich, he's like the second all-time goal scorer, second all-time appearances. But so he kind of isn't outright anything. But he had 3 separate spells at Ipswich. And when I started going to those games, and the game that sticks out, well, there's 2 games that really stick out. He played in both. First one is Paul Scholes' first game for Man United when we beat them 3-2, which was unreal to start with. John Walk, centre back at that point, unflinching with like Cantona all over him. He didn't care. He bossed him around that part. But the game I really remember was against Norwich, and it was Portman Road used to have the nicest pitch. It was beautiful, absolutely like spotless. But this was around Christmas time, this game, and the pitch was dog rough. I've never seen it as bad. It was kind of like the old Rex we used to play football on. We were playing Norwich, and it was the first Ipswich Norwich game I'd ever been to. I didn't really understand why, but the family enclosure, which, because we were only kids at the time, it was me, Mark, and Pete, and my dad. We were sat in the family enclosure, and behind us, in the big stands where the Norwich fans were, it's like, it's a bit raucous. Like, you wouldn't put your family stand or anything, but that's where we were sat. And it got to I think it must have been in the first half. We got a penalty. John Walk steps up, slots it home, brilliant. Walks off, like barely even celebrates, just walks off as if nothing's happened, and kind of unbelievably losing your mind. They then they bring a sub on who's, I cannot remember his name, but begins with E, and he dyed his hair green for the game. Why can't I remember his name? Anyway, he scored this equaliser. It came down to the last 3 or 4 minutes. And their centre-back plays the ball back to Brian Gunn. And the pitch at the time, like I say, was awful. Brian Gunn goes to kick the ball clear, bobbles clean over his foot and goes in. And, like, it's just, like, my perfect match. Like, you're playing your biggest rivals. Your favourite players scored this penalty that, since then, I just think, and no other penalty comes close to it. And I'm pretty sure it just side-footed it down the middle as Brian Gunn dived out the way. But it doesn't, in my head, it's like flying it. And then, to have that winner with kind of that awful kind of, I say awful, that kind of mistake from Norwich makes it twice as sweet. But no, John Walk, unbelievable player, played in most positions, weirdly. Probably didn't play at the wings, but played everywhere else. It was kind of classic number 10 Rooney type role when he started. Not quite a forward, but was a forward. It was Bobby Robson that brought him down from Scotland. Played at Ipswich for a good few years until he went off to that amazing Liverpool team in the 80s. And in that team, and I think this is something that's interesting about John Moore, he scored a goal every other game, playing as a midfielder in that team. Unreal, like really really good player. Came back to Ipswich, had a decent spell, and then went to Middlesbrough, I believe, for a couple of seasons, then came back to Ipswich. And the time I remember him, he was a centre back, taking penalties and scoring goals through that route. But he's just one of those players that the more I look at him, the more you kind of watch old footage, and I did kind of when I was a bit older, he was just a complete player. He really was. And I think one of those types of players I was describing earlier that isn't necessarily going to set the world on fire. And if you don't know much about Ipswich, you've probably not really heard of John Walk. And he played a few games for Scotland. And if you've watched Escape to Victory, obviously he's in that, which shoots him up to global stardom. But he was just a really solid player. and one that you can get behind. And he's still at the club now. He does all the ambassadorial stuff, and he's still sporting that mustache. And the biggest regret I have is when we went to visit our friends, the Crawleys, and my dad went out with, and I'm pretty sure it was Hannah and Bethan, went to Blockbuster's video in Ipswich, and John Walk was there. And I just said, no, I can't be bothered to go because me and Pete wanted to play football or something. And I missed meeting John Walk in Blockbusters. I could not believe it.
Oh, mate.
But like, it has to be him. It has to be him.
No, I completely understand. But I mean, what sort of took my breath away a bit was, as you sort of mentioned it before, I just assumed he was always a centre-back. I think that's because, by association, I just remember growing up, as we did together in the 90s, he was pretty much always playing as centre-back. Because I think that was on his last tenure back at the club. He pretty much just went back. So when I saw his goal scoring record, I was absolutely flabbergasted as to how on earth had this centre-back scored that many goals. But what an incredible player to be able to almost sort of finish his career back as a centre-back, but still be able to bang a penalty away. Just a complete player, like you say.
Yeah, the only one I remember doing something similar would be Dion Dublin.
Yeah, he comes to
mind.
He
ended up playing at centre back, didn't he? Yeah. But slightly different gravy, I think. But I think that the thing that shocked me, and I didn't know it until I was speaking to a Liverpool fan. Actually, it was his dad I was talking to about it because he found out I was an Ipswich fan. He was waxing lyrical about John Walk back in the 80s in that Liverpool side. And that Liverpool side was brilliant. Like, let's face it. And that midfield was just unreal. And he was at the front of that, putting goals away. And you just think, I wouldn't even know John Walk played for that Liverpool team. But he scored every other game. And it's just remarkable, really. It really is. But yeah, he's an interesting player. And there's been a few at Ipswich. There's been a few there's been some great names as well. Really good, solid names. But like
examples?
Boncho Genchev is just a solid footballer.
That's some pretty, face
it. Gus Ullenby, like, these are good names.
Titus Bramble.
Titus Bramble's a great name, exactly. But I was surprised to see so much of him when you look back, so much of him up front, and he was such a pivotal part of the team, and you could build teams around him, and they did. But yeah, I remember him next to, and I never remember because obviously Andy Linnigan used to play for. I think it's Andy that used to play for Arsenal, and David used to play for Ipswich.
Yeah, that's right.
They're both the centre back brothers. And it was him next to John Walk. And when you watch back now, they are the slowest, oldest men you've ever seen as centre back. You look at the centre backs we have, like in the Premier League now, and you just think, right, these guys don't really tie up. It's a different game. It was a different
definitely.
Game, but they fit that game perfectly, and John did especially.
Yeah, no, definitely. Any other sort of players that you think are sort of worth mentioning? Obviously, Alan Brazil, Ray Crawford. There's some fantastic players you've had.
Osmond, obviously, Ipswich, like all time. McMills. These are like players that most non-Ipswich fans don't know, but they're just ingrained at Ipswich. They're a little bit before my time. I think if I think of the players that I Matt Holland, I think really underrated player, stood out in that World Cup where Roy Keane decided not to play for Ireland for all kinds of reasons. Matt Holland steps up and fills a void and was brilliant. He was a solid player. I think it's a weird one because there's quite a few players that have played for Ipswich and gone on to be brilliant as well. So Noble was one that I think we had on loan for only half a season or a season, and he was brilliant. I remember seeing him thinking, this guy's unreal. And then he just kind of was a pin in that West Ham side for the last few years. He was a really solid player. And actually a good friend of mine is a Stoke fan, and John Walters came up. And John Walters was the heartbeat of the club at that point when he was playing for Ipswich before he moved over to Stoke. Absolutely. He was just like a machine in what he did. He was a big man up front that could play football, but he was excellent. But I feel like Ipswich have had these kind of caricature players more than anything. So like like Herman Hreidarsson was just this Icelandic monster that came from nowhere. He was unreal. Shefki Kucci from Finland, who had that celebration that people remember, just like falling on his backside. And then I don't know. There's just there was some really, really fun players.
What was the name of the goalkeeper where we just all the time used to mimic the
slam?
Yeah,
Serene.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, and we'd seen no other goalkeeper kick a ball like that. But yeah, this is brilliant.
No, he could kick it out of Portman Road if he wanted to. He could have kicked it clean out of Ipswich if he really wanted to. He was. I don't know if he is or was, but I'm pretty sure he was our record signing at the time, 4-point-something million, like a big money. It was just, and he ended up going back to Italy, I think, from memory. But he was a really good keeper, really good, and he was like nothing you've ever seen. Like you say, that kick itself was just crazy. But like, we seem to have these odd kind of players, and yeah, I think looking back, Chris Kiwomya was a player I really liked back in the late kind of 90s, and there was David Johnson who we saw. I think we sold the season we got promoted. I think we sold him to Forest or somewhere like that. But he'd been banging goals in for us all that point, and I felt bad for him. And he didn't. I don't think he got to play the final because he got injured. So he'd had his career at Ipswich, seen us promoted, and then went and played somewhere else. But he was a great player. But it's hard when you pick. Like I put John Walker on a pedestal, but then there's just loads of other characters. There was Klaus Thompson we used to have in the mid-90s, who had the world record for the longest throw-in at the time. And like these are things that don't matter, but as a kid, you're like, Klaus Thompson, yeah, he's got the world record for a throw. Like, it's amazing. I could have been sold that as a lie. I probably need to go check that, or you need to fact check that for the podcast. But there was him, and then there was Neil Thompson, who was on the other wing, who was a brilliant corner taker. Craig Forrest, our goalkeeper, that has the worst.
Was he the goalie on the 9-0 drubbing?
Yeah. He's got the worst record. He had 2 games at Old Trafford. He lost 9-0, then went back with West Ham. I think he lost 6 or 7-1. And like, there was 2 games back to back.
Don't put him in goal.
Think, don't go back, Craig. Yeah, it's not what he was a Canadian goalkeeper. Frankie Allop. But no, because it's such a it's one of those clubs that's not at the top, and it's kind of just flirted with it, and predominantly in my life it's been a second tier club. You get these oddball players, these kind of different players who have something about them that means that they kind of have this little spark. Kunyago was one. Like he was brilliant, but not brilliant, if you know what I mean. He just shone for a certain reason, and I really enjoyed that about Ipswich. I always thought it seems to have these odd players more than any other club, and it's probably just because you spend a lot longer looking at the team and the players and where they come from, and you find out who's got the longest throw and all these kind of boring, like weird things to anyone else. But to you, especially as a kid, when you're kind of, especially when Ipswich went down quite early on, I remember we must have only been in about 5 or 6 at school, so I can't think how we were 10, 11. No one else is supporting a second division team at that point. No one. So you've got to find these other things out somehow. And the internet wasn't around. You didn't have these other things. So you'd just be reading the program. You'd try and find any bit of information you can. It's fun. Like I think, look back at them and think they're old, like they're old characters rather than like your team's football players.
Yeah, no, definitely. Just before we round things up, mate, what is your favourite ever goal?
There's a few that stand out. Like there's Alan Armstrong, spelled with a U, who scored against Milan. So that was that season we went down. But amazing, like for us to be beating Milan, I'm pretty sure it had Ronaldo in that team at that point. Like they weren't a nobody, and they came to Ipswich 2001. It would have been, I guess. And we beat them. Yeah. It's just unreal. And then there's been the odd winners against kind of like I say, that goal, the own goal for Norwich. But you can't have your favourite goal as an own goal. Doesn't quite feel.
I see where you're coming from though, like in terms of what it stands for. But yeah.
But it's I think that's a weird one that I've come to terms with in older age. So we've grown up with a friend who's a Norwich fan. Like this is a funny quirk of living where we lived. Like you've got everyone that supports big clubs, and then those that support the little clubs probably support the rivals of yours because they've gone down a similar route, but just ended up in Norfolk. And I've got a weird affinity to Norwich more than I have a kind of passionate hatred because they're a similar club and they're overachieving, and you just think, I like that. I like that about football now. I don't have that same animosity, and it's different for every player and fan and club. But I kind of think I'm past that part. Actually, I find it a bit more interesting. So it feels like I can't pick that because it would go against what I really think. But the goal I remember most from the Premier League is there's two actually. There's Herman Hreidarsson scoring against. I'm pretty sure it was against Portsmouth. It's just a scrappy corner, but it was just we were riding high at that point, and Hreidarsson scored. And he stood on like the advertisement boards and just leans into the crowd, and he just disappears, and it's just like brilliant for the kind of action of it. And Martin Royce has scored this amazing free kick. We just bent the ball in the top corner. I think that was against Spurs. I'm pretty sure we lost the game, but he scores this amazing goal. But I really struggled to pick one goal that stands out. And I think I'd want it to be one of the ones I'd seen live, but weirdly, the goals I remember live, the most vivid memory I have live is Bobby Zamora scoring for West Ham in the semi-final playoff, and that was when West Ham were just better than us. And I remember going away from that game thinking, well, that's our season wasted, but we lost to a team that was better than us, and that Bobby Zamora was better than our team at that point. He just scored an amazing volley from outside the box. I remember Chef Kikuchi picking up the ball just inside our half and driving through to the goal and scoring, and just thinking, how's he done that? Like, he hasn't got that skill to do that, but he just pulled it out of the bag. But I'm fumbling around because I can't think of one.
Yeah.
I really can't, but which is strange because I think the games we won, like the playoff final, there was a 1-4-2, and the fourth goal was a lovely goal, but it's not what I think of straight away. And I don't know if that's just the curse of being a football fan, is the goals I think of are the goals against us. And that Bobby Zamora one sticks up. There was a time we went to see Ipswich Norwich on it would have been my dad's birthday, so right before Christmas. And Norwich scored. Norwich won 1-0. And I remember that goal vividly. Yeah, absolutely vividly.
Maybe it's just a symptom then of I don't know. More or less, you sort of scoring these goals as a result of it being more of a team effort in a way, and you don't really have sort of individuals that stick out. And then you kind of mentioned it before, where you have these sort of quirky individuals. Maybe that sticks out more than usual.
Yeah,
like you said with Chef Kikuchi, I can't really remember a single goal that he scored, but the thing that comes to mind first is his celebration.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
I think the goal that had to boil it down. I know I can't. I was just thinking that another goal came to mind then. I think of Titus Bramble. The first thing I think of, he scored a goal with a broken leg against Lokomotiv Moscow in the UEFA Cup, or in the UEFA Cup, and you just think, that's crazy. But that's the kind of thing I remember. I remember Kieran Dyer skinning about 3 people, bending the ball, and it hit the post. But I don't know what it says about an Ipswich fan that I don't remember the goals. I remember either the near misses or the opposing goals. But I think that's probably where we are at the minute. I think you don't support Ipswich for the goals. You support Ipswich for all the other things. I do remember Marcus Stewart scoring at Anfield. That season we were decent and we won 1-0 at Anfield, and he seemed to just dance around their penalty box and put the ball in the back of the net. But yeah, I'm really hard pressed on that one. I am really hard pressed.
Yeah, I think you've given pretty much decent answers. And yeah, I can understand. In a way, it's almost a good thing that you can't think of one sort of standout goal. It's just, these sort of nice sort of blurrings of memories that come to mind more than anything else.
Yes, the sign we're getting old, mate. That's what it is.
Yeah, I was just trying to romanticise it there for you. But excellent, man. It's been a pleasure having you on, Luke, and it's just been really nice to actually talk to you more about Ipswich Town and where I understand them a bit more now as well, just having done a bit of research. So it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. What did you find out about them that surprised you?
Just John Walk. That's absolutely like flabbergasted me. Like I said, that really stood out the most. But yeah, I suppose like I always knew about Alf Ramsey, but it wasn't something that sort of like stood out to me massively. But when I sort of saw it again, I was like, oh my God, you actually won the league with Alf Ramsey. And the fact that Alf Ramsey was your manager, that's an incredible thing. And yeah, I'd say those sort of two things were the standouts at the most. Thanks again, my man.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I'll speak to you soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Triple F. If you could please drop a like on our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter, that would be massively appreciated. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F.